9 experienced hikers, 1 tent slashed open from the inside, and every answer only makes it stranger. 9 experienced hikers set up camp on a bare mountain slope in the remote northern Ural Mountains. By morning, all 9 were dead. Their tent was still standing, but it had been slashed open from the inside. What made trained, disciplined mountaineers cut their own shelter apart and run half-dressed into a freezing, sub-zero night has never once been fully explained, despite decades of careful investigation and modern science. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a confident 23-year-old engineering student. Most were students or graduates from the same institute, seasoned in hard winter travel. This was not a casual outing at all. They were earning the highest, top-level hiking certification, and the route through the frozen wilderness was rated as difficult. These were people who knew exactly how dangerous the cold could be and how to respect it. Their long journey began by train, then truck, then on skis into deeper and deeper snow. The last village they passed was a remote logging settlement. Beyond it lay nothing but forest, frozen rivers, and open, windswept ridges. They photographed each other along the way, smiling, joking, filling their diaries with ordinary details about food, jokes, and weather. Nothing in those pages or those photographs hints at what was coming. One member turned back early. He had joint pain and could not safely continue, so he left the group at the last outpost and went home. It was a small, unremarkable decision at the time. It also saved his life. Because of it, he became the only member of the original party to survive, and one of the few witnesses to what the group was like in those final days. The remaining 9 pressed on toward a mountain the local people called Dead Mountain. On the final day, they climbed onto an exposed slope instead of camping in the sheltered forest below. Why they chose the open slope is still debated today. Some believe they wanted to avoid losing hard-won altitude or to practice cold camping. Whatever the reason, they pitched their tent on the bare mountainside in the wind. That night, something drove all 9 out of the tent at once. When rescuers finally reached the camp weeks later, they found it half collapsed and buried in snow, but still standing. Inside were the group boots, coats, and supplies, neatly left behind, along with food set out as if for a meal. The most disturbing detail came from the fabric itself. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Think about what that means. 9 trained hikers, in the middle of a sub-zero night, chose to slash through their own shelter rather than use the entrance. They abandoned their boots and warm clothing. Then they walked, and in some cases ran, down the slope toward the distant tree line, roughly a mile away. Whatever frightened them, they judged that staying inside was somehow more dangerous than the killing cold outside. When the group failed to return on schedule, worried volunteers and soldiers were sent to search. Days passed with no sign. The wilderness swallows tracks quickly in winter, and fresh snow erases a trail overnight. Then a search party spotted the corner of the buried tent on the slope. From that fixed point, they began following the faint footprints leading downhill, and the story slowly, terribly, began to reveal itself. The footprints were strange. In places, they showed bare feet or feet in only socks, preserved as raised columns of packed snow where the softer surface had blown away. They led downhill in a fairly orderly way, side by side, suggesting the group left together rather than scattering in blind panic. The trail pointed steadily toward the forest, toward a large old pine that would become the next grim marker. Under that pine, searchers found the first 2 bodies. Both men were dressed only in underwear, their skin burned near the fire. Beside them lay the remains of a small blaze and broken branches. Marks on the tree showed someone had climbed it, perhaps to look back toward the tent, perhaps for wood. They had tried to survive, but near naked in that cold, a small fire was never enough. 3 more bodies were found on the slope between the pine and the tent. Their positions, faces turned uphill, suggested they had died trying to crawl back toward the camp. One of them was Igor Dyatlov himself, clutching a small branch. The pattern hinted at a plan. Some stayed by the fire. Others attempted the desperate return to the tent for boots and warm clothing. None of them made it, but 4 hikers were still missing. The search for them stretched on for months until the deep snow of winter finally began to melt in spring. The last 4 were not on the open slope at all. They were found in a ravine, in a forested gully buried under many feet of hardened, compacted snow. Recovering them took careful excavation with tools, and what they revealed changed the entire case. The final four were better dressed than the others. Some wore clothing that had clearly been taken from those who died first, carefully cut and shared among the living. That detail alone tells a quiet, brutal story of people trying desperately to keep each other alive a little longer. But their injuries were what stunned investigators. These were not the simple deaths of hikers who had frozen in the open. Two of them had severe chest fractures, ribs broken on both sides. One had a serious skull injury. Yet remarkably, several had little external damage to match. No matching wounds on the skin. Investigators compared the force needed to break those bones to the impact of a car crash. And one of the bodies was reportedly missing its tongue and eyes, a detail that has fueled decades of dark speculation. Here is where we must slow down and think clearly. Missing soft tissue in a body that has lain in cold running water and snow for many months is not proof of violence. Animals, water, and slow decay all take the softest, most exposed parts first. The chest and skull injuries are harder to dismiss, but a careful investigation weighs the mundane explanation before ever reaching for the extraordinary one. Then came the strangest laboratory result of all. Tests on some of the recovered clothing found faint traces of radioactivity. Not enough to be obviously deadly, but more than ordinary clothing should carry. There was no clear source on that bare mountain. Some of the hikers had worked with radiation in their studies, which may fully explain it. But it is one more thread that does not tie off neatly. The official investigation of the time closed the case with a now famous phrase. It concluded that the hikers had died from a compelling natural force that they were unable to overcome. That wording explained almost nothing. It named no avalanche, no storm, no clear cause, no culprit. To many, it felt less like an answer and more like an admission that the authorities did not know or would not say. So let us do what that report did not. Let us take each explanation and test it honestly against the physical evidence, one at a time, calmly. What could drive 9 calm, experienced hikers to cut their way out of a warm tent, abandon their boots, and flee into a lethal night? The answer has to fit every detail, not just the convenient ones, and not just the dramatic ones. The most popular idea is an avalanche. A slab of snow breaks loose above the tent, crushes part of it, and forces the panicked group to cut their way out and flee. It elegantly explains the crushing chest injuries all at once. But there is a real problem. The searchers found no obvious avalanche debris, and the slope angles seem far too gentle for a classic snowslide to release. And the footprints raised another serious doubt. If an avalanche had struck, why were the tracks leaving the tent so orderly and evenly spaced? Why did the group walk rather than run in scattered terror? For years, the avalanche idea sat uneasily beside these objections. It fit some of the evidence and clashed with the rest, which is exactly why the case refused to die and kept drawing new investigators. Other explanations were offered over the years, each bolder. A secret weapons test, strange lights reported in the sky that night by distant observers, even a violent encounter with outsiders. Each idea can grab one loose thread, the radiation, the injuries, the fear. But none of them fits every single fact at once, and most lean on details that were never firmly established. Here, discipline matters more than imagination. Decades later, investigators reopened the case and took another careful look with fresh tools. Using modern modeling of snow behavior, they proposed a refined answer. A small, unusual slab of snow on a slope steeper than it looked once you account for the shelf the group cut into it, could have shifted in the night. It would not roar down like a movie avalanche. It would simply press down silently. In this reconstruction, the group had dug into the slope to pitch the tent, quietly weakening the packed snow above them. A slow slab settles onto part of the tent in the night. Someone is injured, perhaps pinned. In the dark, unable to dig free safely, they cut the wall and retreat to the trees, planning to return once the danger passed. It is plausible, but it is not certainty. And that honesty is the whole point. The refined snow slab model answers more than the old verdict ever did, but it still leaves quiet questions open, unanswered. The radiation traces, the exact pattern of injuries. Why such experienced people made those choices in their final hours? We can build the most likely story from the evidence we have. We cannot climb inside that tent on that night and truly know. What we know for certain is enough to haunt anyone. 9 people, capable and prepared, left a warm shelter and walked out into the killing cold. And every one of them died. They shared their clothing. They built a fire. Some tried to climb back up for the others. Facing something we still cannot fully name, they did not stop trying to survive, and they did not abandon each other. The case remains officially unresolved to this day. What you have seen is a reconstruction built strictly from public records and the recovered evidence, offered for your considered judgment, not as a final verdict. Weigh the facts yourself. If this measured, evidence-driven kind of cold case reconstruction is what you came for, subscribe and stay with the signal. And tell me one thing below: snow or something we still cannot name.